Everybody should put their microphone on mute when they're not speaking. Only use the chat function to address technical difficulties, such as that you can't hear or that we can't hear you. Otherwise, communicate only through speaking. Please direct all discussions and requests to speak through me. If we're able to see each other, you can raise your hand. You can click on the hand icon in WebEx, or you can just ask for recognition and I will allow you to speak. Please limit your discussion to the information items and issues directly related to the information items and refrain from talking over other speakers. When you participate in discussions, please speak directly into the microphone so that we hear and the public who may be monitoring can hear all of the discussions. When you make a motion or a second, please state your name so that we know who's making the motion or seconding, and the recording secretary can record the information for the minutes. We're also, because we're conducting the meeting electronically, all votes must be taken by roll call. That way the public can hear your vote. If you do not vote on a particular item, clearly state that you're abstaining from the vote so that we can determine whether a majority votes in favor of the motion. During the course of the meeting, if you leave the location from which you're participating, let us know so that we can ensure a quorum continues. Are there any questions before we proceed? There being no questions, I will now bring this meeting to order. I'll find my agenda. Okay. So I'll call to order the March 18th, 2021 meeting of the Land Use Advisory Committee. First do we need to do a roll call to ensure a quorum?
Yes, we do.
Okay, let's do that first.
Okay, this is Sandy. We'll start with Abi Sadhu. Jonathan Bonema. Gerald Bruner.
Here.
Carl Droutning.
Here.
Jennifer Geisler. April Graves. Kathy Hemken.
Here.
Noah Keller.
Here.
Philip Klein.
Here.
Trista Maticastillo. Kathy Mokel.
Here.
Steve Morris.
Here.
Mark Nelson.
Here.
Mitra Julali Nelson.
Hey, I just got here.
Okay. Dan Rowe.
Here.
Courtney Schroeder.
Here.
And Wendy Wolf.
Here.
All right. Looks like we have a quorum.
Thank you.
John Bottom is here too.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Oh, good. And I see Jennifer Geisler as well in the chat.
Minutes today. Awesome. Okay. Next up would be approval of the agenda. If there is no objection, we will just proceed with the agenda. We don't have to have a roll call vote on that. So unless anybody has an objection, we'll go with the written agenda. Next up is approval of the minutes from the January 21, 2021 meeting.
Motion to approve, Hemken.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second, Steve Morris.
Thank you. Any comments, changes? Then Sandy, would you call the roll, please?
Sure. We'll start with Abdi Sadhu. Jonathan Bodema. Jonathan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Is that an
Yeah.
aye? Okay.
Yes.
Gerald Bruner.
Here.
This is approval of the minutes. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Carl-
I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay. Carl Droutning.
Aye.
Jennifer Geisler.
Aye.
April Graves. Kathy Hemken.
Yes.
Noah Keller.
Aye.
Philip Klein.
Yes.
Trista Maticastillo. Not here. Kathy Mokel.
Aye.
Steve Morris,
Aye.
Mark Nelson,
Aye.
Mitra Nelson.
I actually go by Mitra Jalali now. Just figured I'd say that. But yes, I.
Oh, okay. I'll remove the Nelson part. Okay. Thank you. Dan
Cool,
Roll,
no problem.
Aye.
Courtney Schroeder,
Aye.
and Wendy Wolf. Okay, I think you're muted, Wendy.
I just said I now. I'm unmuted
Okay,
now, aren't
now
I?
you're good. Yep, you're good
Okay.
now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Those are approved.
So, first up on the business agenda is the work plan of the Land Use Advisory Committee. There's been a little bit added since the last time, nothing removed, but we need to approve it as a group. If you have any questions, we can answer questions. Otherwise, if somebody wants to make a motion to accept the work plan or to approve the work plan.
So moved, Hempkin.
Do we have a second?
Second, Phil Klein.
Second, Fatima.
Hold a question. I'm sorry. I'm apologies. I may have missed this. Chairman Wolf. This is a plan. We're voting to actually approve the 2021 Land Use Advisory Committee work plan.
Yes, we've already completed some of it, but it lays out topics for the rest of the year. We won't necessarily get to all of them, and others can be added if it's appropriate, but it's just a housekeeping thing that we need to do each year.
Was there any opportunity for discussion, or did I miss that piece?
I believe we discussed it a little bit last meeting, but it follows from all the questionnaire things that we did last year, topics that we haven't gotten to yet, plus things that staff need us to do because of our statutory obligations and whatnot.
Would I be able to ask just one question about the work plan?
You can ask as many questions as you'd like.
Perfect. The one piece, just going back through it, is that last bullet we have about centering equity in the committee's work. As I went through the work plan, there's a lot of items, and I know that the approach has been to kind of build them into the conversation. But I was wondering about the committees, want to actually be more overt in how we think about equity and all the pieces we talk about, what that actually means. I know we've gone through frameworks, but just, I didn't see it again in any part of the work plan. It just felt like a bit of a disconnect for me.
As you said, it's integrated into every single presentation, and Deb can actually send out the information that she sends to our presenters that help them prepare and make sure that they include equity in the work that they're presenting to us. But we can add it to the list if we have time to have something just equity, if that makes you feel better.
Yeah, no, if the plan is to ensure that each presentation will incorporate equity lens and equity conversation, I just want to make sure that was actually the plan. And so if that's a go for it, I just want to keep that front and center, just because being part of that conversations and equity, I just know sometimes they can be difficult, sometimes they're more relevant or less relevant, and everyone's coming from a different place. And so, just probing a bit to see what we wanted to get out of that bullet point, and if we felt we adequately covered, and it sounds like we are, but just checking.
Yes.
Chair, this is
Yes.
Deb.
Go ahead.
I do want to add that, yes, the idea of centering equity is to build it in, and I'd be happy to share the information we provided to staff about doing that. Also, we hope to come back in May and just have a brief check-in on the priorities in the work plan, and also talk about how that notion of integrating equity is working for the committee.
Does that answer your questions, Courtney?
Yeah, it does. I'd be interested if any other committee members had any other thoughts, but that works for me. And so I'd be love to see what the presenters and how it's built in, and but just voicing something I saw. So
Okay, Does anybody else have any comment? If there's no other comments, then we have a motion and a second. If Sandy could call the roll.
Sure, we'll start with Abdi Sado. Jonathan Bodman.
Aye.
Gerald Bruner.
Aye.
I'm sorry, was that an aye from Abdi?
Yes, aye.
Oh, you're here now. Okay, thank you. And then we'll go to Gerald Bruner
Aye.
and Carl Droutning.
Aye.
Jennifer Geisler.
Aye.
April Graves is not here. Kathy Hemken.
Yes.
Noah Keller.
Aye.
Philip Klein.
Yes.
Tristan Mattacastile. Trista? I think she's muted, but I can see her saying aye and nodding yes, so we'll go with that. Kathy Mokel.
Aye.
All right. Steve Morris.
Aye.
Mark Nelson.
Aye.
Mitra Jalali.
Jalali, yeah, thank you. Aye.
Dan Rowan.
Aye.
Let's see, you got Courtney Schroeder
Aye.
and Wendy Wolf.
Aye.
Great.
So that passes unanimously, and we'll move on to our information items. We have the 2040 Comprehensive Plan Composite Report. Michael Larson and Angela Torres presenting.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to have my camera off during the presentation, and then I'll turn it on when we have any questions. I'm Angela Torres, Manager of Local Planning Assistance. I'll be co-presenting today with Michael Larson, Planning Analyst and Local Planning Assistance, on the initial takeaways from the 2040 Local Comprehensive Plans. This presentation is a composite of information gathered from communities across the region, prepared by staff across the council. I want to just extend a huge thank you to all of the colleagues throughout the council that helped to prepare the information that you're seeing today. Some of them are in the audience, so thank you. Next slide, please. So here's today's agenda. As part of setting the stage, I'll share a quick comp plan status update as well as an update on planning assistance grants. The bulk of the conversation today is centered in the land use analysis, so we'll start there and do a deeper dive there, and then we will move into the many factors that influence land use. The other elements will be more of a headline than a deep dive, but if you are particularly interested in any area, we can invite staff from the technical area to share more. We do have a lot of information to share today, but please feel free to ask questions along the way. We may simply note the question for further research, or if it's a clarification, we'll certainly help with that. There will be some natural breaks along the presentation, and then we'll pause along the way as well. We do hope to get to all of the planning topics, but it will depend on what piques your interest. If we don't get to everything, we can come back to follow up. Next slide, please. I'm sure you might remember this graphic from my last status update. As you can see by the big blue circle, we're still in the local comp plan review process, but we are much closer to finishing that stage than we have been in previous updates. Today, we're here to talk about the preliminary takeaways from those 2040 comp plans as of the end of 2020. This is the first, not the only, conversation we will have as we look beyond the comprehensive plans to the next part of the cycle and working towards the next regional development guide. Next slide, please. When the local comprehensive planning process started, the council authorized planning assistance grants to help local governments complete the planning process. LUAC worked to advise on the eligibility criteria established by the council, which targets communities most in need of financial assistance. The grants are not competitive, and every eligible community that wanted a grant has received the first half of that grant. They receive that up front in order to kick off their planning process. The second half payment is dispersed after their plans have been authorized by the council and they submit a final report to the council. The total distributed on the slide represents the first half payments to all grantees as well as the final payments for 35 communities. And those communities include Scott and Carver County townships that the counties plan for, as well as a collaborative of communities that joins together to do the planning process in Dakota County. Next slide, please. Here's where the comprehensive plan review process stands today. Out of 168 expected plans, which deducts the 20 townships in Carver and Scott counties that the counties plan for, we have received 162 for review. No plans are currently in process, which means recently submitted and undergoing a 15 business day review. 23 plans are considered incomplete and we're awaiting a response by the local government and then providing assistance to them along the way. Those are the orange areas on the map. We have one plan, which is the city of Savage in blue on the map, that is considered complete and is scheduled for council review in April. And 138 plans have been authorized by the council. That is the green areas on the map. We do have 6 communities that we haven't received plans yet for, but our sector reps and staff and LPA are working with those communities to help them submit their plans to us. Next slide, please. So now
May I ask a question about that?
Sure.
We've had.
You want to go back to the previous slide?
Yeah, just the one before. I just need clarification. Other people have asked me, and I don't necessarily know the words to use. There was some talk about whether it's approval of plans, or
authorization.
Are the 2040 plans to be approved or passed? What's the language that you use?
Sure. The language is actually defined in statute, and local comprehensive plans, with the exception of the comprehensive sewer plan, are authorized by the council to be put into effect.
Okay, so
the comprehensive sewer plan is approved because it's the council's system, and that element of the larger comprehensive plan is the one element that the council actually approves.
So are they coded as approved on the slide, the comprehensive plan?
Greg, if you'll go back 2 slides, you went forward 1 instead. You're going the wrong direction. There you go. It's actually authorized on the slide, as you'll see. So the plan.
Okay.
We never reference comp plans as approved, with the exception of the comp sewer plan. It's always authorized to reflect the.
So that begs the question. Begs the question of what's the difference between authorization and approval?
Sure. We have had this conversation before. I think we followed up earlier in your tenure, and I might have to ask Lisa Barajas to respond with me. Authorizations. Yeah, Lisa, can you jump in and help us?
Yep, that's okay. It is a little confusing. Madam Chair, Lisa Barajas, Community Development Director at the Met Council here, for the record. The council's authorization is for the local government to go ahead and actually locally adopt your plan. Your plan doesn't go into effect until you, as a local government official, and your colleagues officially adopt it by local government action. Under state law, only local governments, municipalities, cities, townships, counties are authorized to prepare and adopt comprehensive plans. The council in the 7-county area is responsible for review of those plans before your adoption. And that's why we are authorizing those plans to be placed into effect.
So, okay, because when I say approve, I just think approve and authorize are different words, but have the exact same, which is why people ask me about what's the difference, and I still don't have I don't have clarity on that. But we don't have time here to figure that out. But I got to figure that out, I guess, and if someone could help me with that, I'd appreciate it.
We can follow up offline if that would be helpful.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Lisa. Greg, do you mind going to the
Yeah.
next slide?
Yeah, hi, Angela.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Say, you have Carver County is all yellow, which doesn't say it's authorized or approved or anything. It just, the yellow means the townships are apparently part of the application. Am I reading that right?
Greg, can you go back one more? I'm happy to answer that, Jerry. What you're seeing on this map is the townships highlighted because they're the communities represented by Carver County. There's a small notation on the bottom of the map that says all county plans have been authorized. So all of the township individual plans are actually within the Carver County plan.
Okay. Thank you, Angela.
Sure.
And Scott County, or
Scott County as
also
well.
done by county, yeah.
Anybody else have any questions before I move on to the next slide? Okay, Greg, next slide, please. Oh, you went one too many. There you go. Okay, so we've seen then the regional planning cycle with that first slide. We've seen the relationship there with the system and policy plans to the local comprehensive plans. We know that the local comprehensive plans reflect regional policies. I want to emphasize that the starting place for the 2040 comprehensive plans was different from the 2030 plans. And we're doing a lot of comparison between the 2030 plans and the 2040 plans today. So if we remember back, the recession happened just as the 2030 plans were coming in 2008, and communities had already planned for a lot of growth then that didn't happen. The development of Thrive really accommodated for this, so forecasts were largely the same as the 2030 regional development framework. More land wasn't needed in the 2040 plans to accommodate forecasted growth. So with that, the Metropolitan Urban Service Area, the MUSA, largely stayed the same as well. In the 2030 Regional Development Framework, there was a simpler classification, either developed or developing within the MUSA, with simpler expectations for developing density within the MUSA. So a developed community would develop at 5 units, would be guiding at least for a minimum of 5 units per acre, and in the developing areas, a minimum of 3 units per acre. So then based on Thrive, the 2040 plans responded to a much more individualized community designation that looked much more closely to what was reflected with what the communities had planned for in their 2030 plans. I'll insert here that the committee was instrumental in advising on the development of Thrive community designations. So that's part of why we're here in front of you today, to prepare for future work. In addition to the differences between the 2030 and 2040 policies, regional plan policies, the council had also recently adopted a housing policy plan, which wasn't available in 2008. Thrive also provided for density policies for development around transitways where no prior policies had been in place. So the information that local governments have shared in their 2040 comprehensive plans reflect those changes and will now in turn influence the development of the next Metropolitan Development Guide. We're here to help you build on your collective knowledge so that you can feel informed and ready when we start talking about future land use policy development. So this is just the start of the conversation, one of many. Greg, next slide, please. So today we're sharing some observations about what the 2040 plans tell us about what local governments are planning as it relates to land use and factors that impact the built environment and the people that live in that environment. Ultimately, the council uses the information from comprehensive plans to lay the foundation for that future policy development, like I mentioned. That's the next regional development guide. And in which I mentioned, LUAC will participate as well. So we're here today to ask for your help in framing the additional research that's yet to come, as well as preparing for future discussions. Tell us what else you need or want to know to inform land use policy development for the council. We're really looking to refine research questions and asking you to share your perspective. Some of the questions for your consideration are here, but we really want to know, what do you need to know before we start developing the next regional policies? What's the differences that we need to plan for? For example, comprehensive plans, 2040 plans are currently silent on the pandemic, which we all know has taken a significant, has had a significant disparate impact on people, as well as an economic toll on our communities. So how will that impact policy? That's a consideration that we would be thinking about going forward. I think that's the foundation for our conversation today. So unless there are any questions, I'll turn it over to Mike to share the initial land use policy analysis. Okay, next slide. Mike, you're up.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael Larson, planning analyst and local planning assistant. It's good to see you all again, and for those who I haven't met, it's nice to make your acquaintance, and I hope that we can see each other all in person again soon. So I'm going to be giving you some high-level land use plan information, and I, like Angela, I look forward to hearing your comments and your follow-up questions. What piques your interest about what you're seeing today? Where you might want more detail either now, if we're able to give it to you now, or follow up in a future presentation. Next slide, please. So, I'm going to give you some context for land use planning in terms of planning for residential growth, which I'll start with now. So overall, for this round of comprehensive planning, communities in the region are planning for we're planning for a lower level of growth for 2040 than they had been 10 years ago. Then the change reflects a regional economy that, although strong, has been lagging behind many of our peers. So you can see their new forecast for 2040 is actually lower than what we were planning for previously for 2030. However, this change in forecast is not uniform, and I think most of you know this. I think some of you will not be surprised by some of these findings, but I think they're very interesting to get into the details. So what we've been seeing is a change in market demand, obviously, for in new development. One really significant example, I think, is Edina. In Edina's case, the forecast for 10 years from now, for 2030, for that milestone, is 23% higher than what it had been for the previous planning cycle. So we had seen a lot of amendments from Edina over the years. Conversely, we have cities in the region that have excess capacity from their previous round of planning. The development has not materialized in a way that we previously have thought. So having said that, I want to just emphasize a couple of principles at the get-go that in terms of the Metropolitan Council's commitment to local communities. And one, that we honor these prior plans for development, that they could continue to plan to that level of development, even if our current forecasts for those communities are lower than they had been. And two, we adapt to changing development trends. So we try to stay ahead of growth and changes in trends, and adapting to what we see in the ground over time, and monitor that. So next slide, please. Sorry about the delay here. I'm just getting my own notes in order. So there are a number of high level of observations that we've made as we compare 2040 plans to 2030 plans. And keep in mind that we were considering 2 points in time. There have been a number of comprehensive plan amendments responding to changing market conditions. So policy plans are not fixed in stone. They do evolve, but we're comparing 2030 to 2040 plans. So those reflect, both changes in market as well as local policy support for comprehensive plan changes. So overall, plans have identified fewer acres for growth, though we still have, among local plans, we still have much more than is needed than what we're currently forecasting in terms of regional growth. Density ranges are shifting higher to support increased development of multifamily housing projects. And this density increase more than makes up for the reduced acreage that we see in plans. And finally, we're seeing increased use and reliance on various forms of mixed use districts that include residential and non-residential, and both vertical and horizontal mixing of uses depending on the policy context. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a context here for in terms of overall regional land use planning. This is the community designation map here again with a companion bar chart on the right with corresponding colors. It gives you a sense of the percentage of land that each community designation accounts for in the region. The 27 communities that make up the urban center and urban community designations, the two bars on the left, account for approximately 10% of the region's land area, while the 84 communities that account for the suburban edge, and emerging suburban edge designations count for about a third of the region. So this presentation is focusing mostly on the orderly and economical development of the region in terms of its provision of urban services. So we're not focusing on the 53% of the region that is either rural or agriculture. Most of the region's forecasted household growth, population growth, is in the urban services area, with a little less than, I believe, a little less than 2% occurring in the rural area. So please also keep in mind, and these are evolving data sets based on authorizations, and these are from the point of authorization by the council and not any subsequent amendments. But those would not have much impact on the overall data. So next slide, please. So I'm going to show you a set of slides that are formatted all similarly to this one. This first slide starts with land supply comparison, but let me give you orientation. The blue bars represent data from the previous 2030 plans, while the green bars represent data from the most recent round of comprehensive plans, so 2040 comprehensive plans. The two sets of bars on the left represent the sum for the entire urban services area. That includes both wastewater customers of the Metropolitan Council as well as other communities that have local urban services, local wastewater services. And then the other sets of bars represent data from each of the community designations, from most urban on the left to the urban center to least urban on the right, which is emerging suburban edge in our rural centers. So again, the topic of this particular slide is the sum of acreage from comprehensive plans that communities have identified for both greenfield development as well as an estimation of acres that are candidate sites for infill or redevelopment areas in fully developed areas. So as you can see, there's a significant drop in the acreage identified in each of the plans, and this likely results from a variety of factors that could include reduced forecasts in communities, the trends that we see in increased density, and in changes in how restrictive or accommodating a plan might be compared to the last plan. And as you might expect, you see the kind of the largest bars on the growing edge of the region, which tends to be greenfield areas with lower densities. And that have the most acreage identified there for greenfield development. So next slide, please. And please interrupt me if you want to dwell on some of the data on the slide. So one of the things that you're probably familiar with is that Thrive MSP at 2040 establishes minimum densities for development in each of the designations, community designation. And beginning in the previous round of comprehensive plans, communities needed to meet a universal 3 units per acre minimum density. And for Thrive MSP 2040, higher levels of development density expectations were developed for the suburban, urban, and urban center designations. And those are shown in the white label of the middle of the green bar. So one thing I want to emphasize is when we were developing these new minimum thresholds, we did look at old plans, the previous round of comprehensive plans to see what communities were planning for. We looked at market activity to determine what might be a realistic new minimum expectations for new development. So you can see on balance, cities do not have any trouble meeting, and in some cases significantly exceeding those minimums. Now, the ones on the right, suburban edge, emergent suburban edge, and rural centers remain primarily markets for low density development. But as you see momentarily, they're also accommodating small increases in density as well as a shift in the market towards mixed use in some cases. Next slide, please. So I want to emphasize, this slide is looking at what's called midpoint density. So research staff at the council use the midpoint of a plan's density range, its various density ranges rather, to assess a plan's capacity for accommodating future growth. So, at the risk of stating the obvious, if a guiding land use supported a range of, say, 10 to 30 units per acre, obviously the midpoint of that would be 20. And based on past analysis and experience, development tends to trend towards averaging around that midpoint because communities are identifying a range that generally accommodates an appropriate range of densities and residential types. And they tend to some are lower than that midpoint, some are higher, and they tend to average. So we use this figure to identify kind of what a plan's capacity is. So obviously, the thing that stands out most in this chart is that there's a threefold increase for urban center communities that reflects obviously a pretty high range, and this is heavily influenced by the Minneapolis's plan. And so get a little bit into details here in the next slide. So lots of communities in the region that have experienced a wave of mixed use and multifamily development. Minneapolis amended its comprehensive plan in 2016 to reflect the significant higher density proposals that they were seeing, including residential towers, projects on small infill sites, and projects with smaller unit sizes that resulted in increased density. So here is, for example, is a project in downtown Minneapolis that has 262 units, but it has a density of 720 units per acre, and the new Minneapolis plan accommodates a project like that. So if we were to see a project of that scale in a suburban context, that same number of units would probably be on a larger site and therefore on a much lower density. Next slide, please. So on this is the same slide as you saw before, but we took Minneapolis out of the data. So you see a gentler curve from urban center to the emergent suburban edge and rural centers. So coming down from 160 to 66, and lots of details underlying these numbers if you're curious. If we take out St. Paul as well, that number comes down further. It comes down to 50. So, but you still see, all the remaining communities with the urban center designation are fully developed suburbs. So you see even in those urban center suburbs of Minneapolis and St. Paul that the planned density is much higher given the context and market. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to show you another example here of some of the projects we've seen with a significant market shift. And this is the Bauer development in the greater Southdale district. Edina is has a community designation of urban and has a planned midpoint density of 57, which is much higher than its peer number that you see of 32.8. And in the greater Southdale district, this is a portion of that area that's guided, supporting a density range of 90 to 150 units per acre. So that's very, very significant change from 10 years ago for planning in Edina. Next slide, please. So this now, given all that foundational information, this slide now compares the capacity of plans to accommodate all of the forecasted growth. So capacity, we're looking at capacity by multiplying the acreage that communities have identified in their plans by the midpoint of the density range for those acreages. So the black arrow shows where we are in terms of what we're forecasted to grow as a region through 2040. And you can see the land supply regionally more than accommodates what is needed. And a lot of that could be accommodated in the fully developed areas through infill redevelopment or through on the emerging suburban edge. So the role of I just want to again emphasize that the role of Metropolitan Council is to ensure the orderly and economical development of the region. And that includes responding to and being flexible towards the market. And much of this capacity that we see involves redevelopment, which is an economical use of land. But this acreage also includes opportunities for greenfield development, acres that communities have staged to ensure orderly additions to the regional system. Next slide, please. So here, I just want you to keep in mind that this is not the only way we communities plan. So plans must include additional data that we use to plan regional systems, such as this map and table shown here. This includes the geographic allocation of forecasts to what are called transportation analysis zones, as well as sewer sheds, how much growth is going to be connected to regional sewer connection points. So in this particular case, and the exercises that cities go through, these have to sum to their official forecast. So this approach helps us ensure that we are not planning for more capacity than cities need and before it's really needed. When necessary, communities can amend their comprehensive plans to adjust for changes in growth that was unexpected or growth that's faster than they expected. And so because sewer pipes last longer than 20 years, regional sewers and local sewers, we consider a community's potential growth in land use planning helps us understand that. If development trends shift, we can shift gears and adapt to ensure that the capacity will be there when it's needed. And we are constantly monitoring through a variety of data sources what's going on in terms of development in individual communities when they apply for regional sewer connection points and that kind of thing. So next slide, please. So I'm not going to talk about the phenomenon of mixed use. We're seeing more mixed use used in local plans. So this is the phenomenon supported by greater market interest in denser multifamily development, as well as the community's, what we see as a community's desire to create a sense of community or a sense of place where a particular mix of uses could really reinforce and support one another or provide flexibility in the development market. So it really a range of places where this is occurring, like downtown Minneapolis, of course, the hub in Richfield, or the future Gold Line Helmo Avenue BRT station location in Oakdale. So policy and local comprehensive plans vary from place to place and from market to market. Mixed uses might include a collection of standalone uses, like housing and retail next to one another, or could include non-residential uses such as, an office, a coffee shop on the ground floor of a residential a building, like in a very urban neighborhood. One of the things we do is we ask cities to estimate in their plans how much residential development they expect in terms of percentage in these districts, based on their own articulation of their own policy, as well as what's happening in the market in their local community. So next slide, please. So this slide shows the increased reliance on mixed-use districts to accommodate growth. Each of these bars represents the percentage of a city's housing capacity in a plan that is guided within a mixed-use district. So overall, the role of mixed use in accommodating growth has doubled regionally. And then we also see an especially dramatic increase in the suburban edge, as well as rural center communities where such a practice is newer, but where you're also seeing a companion demand in those contexts. So concurrently, just want to emphasize that the number of mixed-use districts has increased, which I think reflects a broader and more refined land use planning practice for mixed use. So please keep in mind that this isn't necessarily the full inventory of mixed-use districts. This data set is where communities had identified where they expected growth to occur. So 237 from 24. So that was pretty amazing to see. So next slide, please. So I wanted to zoom in on the suburban edge because that suburban edge communities, and they're listed there, and just because there was such a dramatic change, and the ones in red show communities where we're fairly certain that for those that had identified areas for growth, they are newly identifying areas for growth within a mixed-use district. So Shakopee is going to be called out a couple times in this overview if we get to everything. But it's one of those communities that embraced more of a mixed-use approach and creating a hierarchical system for density and accommodating commercial and office uses between its downtown area and the neighborhood surrounding it. I've heard from the sector rep that the city has worked hard on economic development plans, not only for their downtown area, but also a concurrent approach to position themselves as a hub for business and industrial development. So the end of that story is that in 2019, the American Planning Association, the Minnesota chapter, selected the city of Shakopee's Envision Shakopee 2040 comprehensive plan as the winner of its Planning and Context Award. So I think that was worth calling out again if you didn't know that. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move on and just touch a little bit upon non-residential use. Our research staff are creating a generalized comprehensive plan map for the whole region based on local plans. One area that we've explored some is the expansion of non-residential land uses in the region, and where we're seeing really any kind of significant change is, as you might expect in the emerging suburban edge designation, where there's the greatest land supply. Often this is a change from a designation that it was previously agricultural or rural, as well as some changes from residential land use categories. So much of this change is to districts that could be called non-residential mixed use, meaning that they could support a variety of employment-bearing uses depending on the city's objectives. Next slide, please. So here's one example. Changes to non-residential land use are typical along a transportation corridor. This is showing Lino Lakes in the northeast corner of the city, adjacent to I-35E, is a new area that the city has guided as business called Business Campus. So it's envisioned to serve as an employment center in the community, supporting a range of business uses. So this is kind of a typical example. I see that there's some questions coming up in the chat, but I'll just keep going. So next slide, please. And I think this is the last slide for my part here, so maybe we can answer questions after that. So just talk broadly about the rural and agricultural patterns, communities. There are three of them, three in the rural area. The diversified rural area is a variety of farm and non-farm uses, including large lot homes, hobby farms, that kind of thing. It's really meant to serve rural lifestyles with the potential for urbanized development at some point in the future, at least no sooner than 2040. And they can accommodate some growth without really requiring premature delivery of urban services. Communities in the rural residential area are primarily large lots with densities that range from 1 unit to 2.5 units per acre. This is primarily due to historical development patterns or the presence of significant topographical or environmental development limitations. These development patterns are widespread in these areas, so they really preclude efficient subdivision, and therefore urban services here are not really cost effective, nor are we planning for them. And there has not been really much change in the policy from 10 years ago, both regionally and locally in these areas. And finally, the agricultural areas are those areas which are predominantly going to be in long-term agricultural use. That's the long-term expectation. And they also have changed very little from the last round. So that concludes my first part of the presentation. So happy to answer any burning questions, I guess. And if I can't answer, I'm happy to follow up. Chances are 50-50,
Mike, this is Joe Bruner.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jerry.
You mentioned Edina and Minneapolis were the fastest growing communities. Now, I've been here in Carver County. My understanding is Carver County is the fastest growing county in the metro area. Is that a true statement?
Well, Chair Wolf, council member, or sorry, committee member, Bruner, I don't have those statistics right in front of me, but I think it's possible that because Carver is a smaller community, that its growth may represent a pretty significant percentage. You know, Minneapolis and Edina already have a significant population, so they may have a lot of growth. But you're right. I mean, there are areas that are growing faster in terms of percentages. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of ways that we can do the math as we look at all of this data and compare it to forecasts and such.
Okay, I wasn't referring to the city of Carver. I was referring to
Carver County. Understood. Yeah,
Okay.
understood. And those are a collection of faster growing suburbs as well. Yes.
Well, then also I'd like to know cities such as Waconia, Carver, and Victoria are annexed, and Watertown too is annexing farmland into the city. How long does it take before those annexed farm acreages get put into the equation as far as less agricultural and more, residential or more cities?
Mike, do you want me to answer?
Yeah, please. I don't typically work in those parts of the region, so Angela is more familiar. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Committee Member Bruner and Chair Wolf. With rural centers like Waconia and the others that you mentioned, they oftentimes have orderly annexation agreements. And those orderly annexation agreements set the time and staging for when those areas will actually become part of the city. Those are agreements that are in place between the townships and the city. The areas within orderly annexation areas are permitted for the city to actually plan land uses for those areas, but there are other areas where a community can annex by ordinance, just one parcel already adjacent to the city boundary, and those things happen as property owners make those requests to the city. And again, those are agreements between the two parties. Those aren't long-term planned as part of long-term planning, which is what we're talking about now in the 2040 comp plans. Those happen and they let us know about those things through comprehensive plan amendments. And so we're aware of what the land use changes are over time. Does that help?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, did you still have a question about the percentage of non-residential use?
I did, yeah. If we have an answer to that, that'd be great. The question was in the previous slide, the non-residential use, there was a percentage of the mix, but do we have, as was in previous slides, do we have the percent change or the distance to change to see if there was regional wide changes? I think we all know our local area changes, but on our plans, but it'd be interesting to see region wide what those changes were.
Right. Yeah, thanks. We have a variety of different data sets that we're developing, and the data set that we're using was for the residential relates to acres that the community has identified for residential growth. We don't have a companion data set for that. We are compiling, like I had mentioned, this regional composite planning land layer, so we can identify kind of what the net changes in amount of commercial industrial non-residential mixed use that has been planned for the city. And then I think in most cases those will be minor adjustments. We don't have acreage in terms of commercial industrial growth areas. We do have the TAZ, the Transportation Analysis Zone data set, where communities allocate, as I mentioned, allocate their growth. So it's that data set that has to add up to their forecast. So they identify like where they think new jobs are going to be
Yeah,
over time.
Mike,
So,
if I could just real quick, if you just go back to
Yeah.
the previous slide, if we could, that's
Yeah.
I understand your answer, but that maybe it was one previous to that, the pie chart. That
Yep.
is that what you're saying we don't have a data set for? The difference if that particular
Right. We
was
can
like
identify
that.
when we look. I mean, we could. This is like a composite for the whole area, so we can kind of calculate total acreages in terms of commercial, institutional, industrial, non-residential, mixed use, and then sort of visually identify where there's been significant, like where there's been changes. So, there's some different. We can explore some different ways to slice and dice that information. Yeah. I'll see what we can do.
This is one of those research questions that we had as well, Steve. Thank you.
Chair Wolf, Carl Drotnik.
Hi, Carl.
Hi there. Back to annexations, and I think it's important that annexations do not always mean more houses. They can and add density. They can be for other purposes. We just rezoned an area that's now in Lakeville that was formerly township. That's the airport. That's certainly not going to add density opportunities to Lakeville, but it needed to happen for sewer services. And I think there's been some other occasions where annexations have taken place for industrial uses and some of those kind of things. So it doesn't necessarily mean rooftops or houses. It's done for other reasons, and hopefully it's done in an orderly manner. And most of the time, I think it is.
Thanks, Carl. We're ready to move on, or are there more questions? Looks like we're ready to move on.
Okay. Greg, if you could advance to the housing. There you go. And you can advance to the next slide, please. We're getting into the portions of the presentation where our various technical experts that partner with us in other work units have provided some analysis for us. For the housing analysis, housing policy staff reviewed housing chapters of 119 comprehensive plans and shared with us several housing planning trends and themes. What we're seeing is planning for an aging population is widespread across plans. I think we expected that, and so that's good to see. Similar to the land use analysis, housing analysis also showed that communities were using mixed use districts more frequently, in this case with the purpose to accommodate affordable housing needs. Some communities explored environmentally friendly housing and green building standards. And while we see different approaches to identifying local housing needs, the plans help to identify where additional technical assistance can be warranted. So that's where this wide variability really helps us understand where the questions fell for that. So as an example, we can help provide communities with information that can make it easier to identify needs other than cost-burdened households, for example. So many other things. Next slide, please. This table reinforces again some of what the land use analysis showed, which identifies an increase in the use of mixed use land use categories to accommodate affordable housing. 53% of all allocated affordable housing units came from mixed-use land use designations. And that assumes minimum density development scenarios as well. And 67% of all possible units would be in mixed-use land uses using that minimum density. Next slide, please. Mike will take the transportation section.
I will.
Unless we lost
No,
Mike.
no, you didn't lose me. Just takes a second to connect. Staff and Metropolitan Transportation Service has reviewed 150 plans to see if they had included specific data related to transportation modes like highways, biking, pedestrian transit. And if communities had also thought about transportation technology topics like automated vehicles, drones, electric cars, that kind of thing, to see what where communities might be headed in terms of their interests and needs to help us with potential technical assistance and policy development. So many of the communities in the region are at different stages of addressing transportation topics, depending on their context and what transportation touches their region. So we're going to just give you some summary data on what on as a whole was addressed in their plans. Next slide, please. So the blue, I'm going to show you a set of bars again. The blue bars on this chart represent the percentage of plans that address an aspect of planning, and the red means they did not. So on the left side of the slide, we see that 83% of communities addressed freight traffic on their roadways, and that's what HCAADT means. Pardon the acronym. Below that, you will see that 45% of plans identified new roadways in their plans that are not currently funded in the transportation policy plan. So these are above and beyond what the region thinks it can support with expected funding sources. So local plans can do this, provided that they are explicit about this funding limitation and the process by which the roadways could become part of the regional system. So, and each of these communities did this correctly, and that actually was an expectation for plans. So on the right, we have some figures regarding bicycling. Almost all communities didn't include traffic counts for bikes. That's what that means, 98%. Many communities, however, didn't have bicycle policies, specific bicycle policies, and many communities also address on-street bike facilities as well as separated bike lanes. Next slide, please. So on the left, we see a bunch of statistics related to pedestrian planning, with a majority of these having specific pedestrian-related policies. The green bar in the third bar down shows that most of these policies are included in the transportation section of the plan versus what some communities do. We put it in the parks section if pedestrian activity is mostly recreational. Almost no communities counted pedestrians, nor did they address specific planning areas or zones for pedestrians. 30% of plans address compliance with Americans with Disabilities Act, and 20% address, which you're probably familiar with, the principle of complete streets. On the right, we have some transit-related data. We see that more than a third of plans addressed opportunities for transit beyond what are the ordinary transit facilities that are planned for communities, and about 36% in addressed what are called increased revenue transit ways. And like the highway data that I mentioned on the previous slide, the transportation policy plan identifies transit ways that the region would invest in should there be more revenue than what we currently expect. And so communities often identified those as desirable and would identify them in the plans as part of the increased revenue scenario. And Metropolitan Transportation Services staff also addressed what they thought were unique strategies, and unfortunately, I don't have more information on that. But if that piques your interest, we can follow up on that. Next slide, please. So land use is mostly addressed in the land use chapter of a comprehensive plan, but obviously it's related to a lot of things like housing, and in this case, transportation staff wanted to see if land use was addressed related to transportation demand, need, that kind of thing in their plans, and 36% of communities did that. in their transportation chapter. And I just wanted to call out Minnetonka is one plan that I reviewed that did this exceptionally well. And slightly more plans addressed the relationship. 42% addressed centers of growth and the potential to impact multimodal transportation options to those centers of growth. So on the right, we've got some other topic areas. So of particular interest to MTS, transportation staff, 1/3 of the plans addressed. I thought this, I'm actually struck by that it was this high. What CAV is an acronym for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles, in essence, driverless cars that can talk to one another. So that's in our future at some point, and 33% of plans address that. A small percentage to address drones, which is probably also an innovation in freight delivery that we'll see in the future with delivery by drones, and almost half of the plans actually incorporated transportation safety and crash data, which is helpful to identify priorities and needs to mitigate the risk of injury and death. And that, yeah, that ends the transportation section. If you are interested in any questions at this point before we move on to water resources.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
Go ahead, John.
If there is I assume there's going to be, but if there's a 2050 plan that will need to be submitted in 9 years, I remember going through this on our existing city council, and slides like this or a slide deck like this would be super helpful. So if there's a way to commingle good analysis of the 2040 plans, and next time there is a requirement to go over some of these slides, would be very helpful. We had some, but nothing like this that can be very helpful in putting the plan together. So if there's a place to keep them and we reissue them next time we are assigned to do these plans, that'd be super helpful.
Chair Wolf, and
Go ahead, Angela.
Chair and committee member, yes, that's exactly our intention. So it's great to hear that that would be valuable. So that reinforces what we were planning on doing. We're hoping to post that on the council's website after we get a little bit more in-depth analysis done and kind of more rounded out full information. So thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate it. Were there any other questions? Otherwise, I will take over and talk about water resources. Takeover sounds like it's hostile. I'm pretty sure Mike is happy with it.
Go ahead and proceed, Angela.
Thanks. Water resources actually encompasses 3 different policy areas for the council. So wastewater services, local surface water management, and water supply. So all of those come together to have like a one water effort. And wastewater is the system that we manage and is part of the system. The others are managed by other statutes or are like water supply done in cooperation with other agencies. So with wastewater, we found several things. I'll start kind of by the numbers. So a total of 126 community wastewater plans are required to be reviewed and approved by the council. Those are the communities connected to the regional system. And as of March of this year, we've reviewed all of those except for 23. So we still have a little bit to go. We knew that going into it. We've got 30 outstanding comp plans. 23 of those outstanding comp plans are within the MUSA. Our initial findings from comprehensive sewer plans include a couple of things to note. There was much more specificity around I&I. A large part of that is because we requested that, and then forecasted growth locations were included with that as well. We had some.
Angela, you might want to specify what I&I is, because some of us know, but some of us who don't live in this world might not know.
You are right, Wendy. Sorry. Chair Wolf. I is inflow and infiltration, and I guess I should have had a definition prepared for it, but it's essentially water in the wastewater sewer pipes. So
it's repairing leaks in the
Yeah.
in the sewer system, basically.
Yeah. And so, anybody have any questions on that? Please say no because Kyle's not on the call today. So with the wastewater system, we noticed that we were aware of several things, planning for several things, like the City of Rogers wastewater treatment plant was acquired by the council in July of 2019, and that came online during this planning process. The City of Loretto was to connect to the system in the summer of 2021. Via regional wastewater system with the use of local sewer systems with a cooperation of Independence and Medina until growth in that area really warrants a regional interceptor service, which we anticipate that around 2030. The plans also identified system capacity improvements and acquisitions, and we have a couple of examples there. City of Lino Lakes has a new interceptor that was first planned in 2008. It's now required by 2030. City of Lake Elmo, capacity enhancements for that southwest area of the city where they're seeing a lot of development. And the City of Savage has planned for trunk sewer acquisition for Credit River Township and planning to provide that service by 2030. And those are all new components for the wastewater system. We also obviously saw minor refinements as communities were planning all along the timing of the system enhancements. Next slide, please.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Jerry.
I was just curious, like when these towns connect to the council's systems, like Rogers and Loretto will be, who pays the cost to do that? Does the city pay the cost to hook up to your pipes, or does the Met Council pay for that?
The city pays connection fees, but it depends how much depends on whether they're sort of a scheduled connection or if they're an unscheduled connection that's farther out. Like when Elko Newmarket connected to the system, they have to pay a surcharge along with the regular connection fee because it was earlier than it was supposed to be because they overran their system that they had. But it gets paid over time with those connection fees. We're basically loaning, we borrow the money and then pay it back over time with connection fees.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Carl Drottning, could we talk a little more about the Credit River? How do I go about getting more details on that? I know that there's some folks in Credit River that are talking about making it a city as opposed to a township, and a bunch of other political things going on. Is there a way to get more information on that?
Chair Wolf?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I can share a few facts that I know. The city has submitted to incorporate, or sorry, Credit River Township has submitted papers to incorporate, so they are looking to become a city. This is the first time that Credit River Township has completed their own comprehensive plan. Previously, that was done by Scott County, but knowing that they were moving in this direction, they requested to do their own plan this time. Some of the conversations with Credit River Township are around failing individual subsurface sewer systems on individual properties. And so in order to provide assistance to receive, well, for the health of the system, right? So the township is, I'm not saying this eloquently, but the township is receiving service or planning to receive service through the City of Savage, who has a trunk line in proximity that the township can connect to. And we worked long and hard with the township in order to appropriately plan for some of these things. The first primary effort is to make sure that there's not environmental contamination through failing systems, and so providing service to those neighborhoods with those circumstances are the first priority, and that is where the connection through Prior Lake is happening. I'm sorry, Savage is planned. And obviously, the Met Council over time would need to acquire some infrastructure there in order to provide enough capacity to serve another community.
So it's in process right now. And are they done? I don't remember from the map, but they haven't completed their comp plan yet, have they? I don't remember seeing it.
Yes, they have.
They did. Okay.
They have been authorized, yes.
That's okay. Yeah. So they're working through all of the issues. They just decided they were going to contract with the Scott County Sheriff's Department for police protection rather than have their own police department. But it's a long process to become a city.
It is.
Should be very entertaining to watch. So.
I have no comment on that part.
Well, you can't, and I'm not a staff person, so I can sit here and smirk and smile and think about all the years that they were subdividing down to 2.5 acres, and now they're wondering why they have a problem. So it's just, yeah, it's interesting. Thank you.
If there aren't any other questions, I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, thank you. This map is the, it shows the long-term sewer service area for the region. This comes from the Water Resources Policy Plan. And I highlighted a couple of things that really talks about the bulk of the big changes that came through the wastewater, the comp sewer plans this time. And that is a couple of communities were removed from our plans to provide service. City of Oak Grove was eliminated through legislative action, and Baytown Township was eliminated due to capacity at the St. Croix Valley wastewater treatment plant. As we've mentioned, the green circle on the map touches on the addition of Credit River Township and the planning that's in place for that. There's a lot of work then to update this map and refine based on changes in the comprehensive sewer plans to update what that MUSA boundary looks like. And that's planned to be done through the end of 2021. The wastewater staff are also planning to update the existing service area for 2020 and the proposed 2030 staging areas, again on that same timeline. A lot of GIS work happening, and to complete a local 2040 wastewater plan composite data set summary. So a lot of analysis, and some of that analysis includes the inflow and infiltration data and sewer forecast broken down to regional service connections too. So this is analysis yet to come. These are some of the things that wastewater staff have identified we need to look into in order to continue to plan for the wastewater system. So next slide, please. Local service water plans are also reviewed as part of the comprehensive planning process. This time around, the timing for surface water plan review was shifted earlier, and most of the plans were due in 2017 and 2018. The surface water management plans are set in statute, they are organized under the Metropolitan Land Planning Act, but as well as responding to Minnesota rules for metropolitan water management. So there's multiple pieces of statute that apply to local surface water management plans. So that means that all of the cities and townships had to have their local service water plans done in 2017 2017 or 2018, but that plan had to be included in the 2040 comprehensive plan. So far, surface water management staff have received and reviewed plans that covered 177 communities, so they are much closer to being complete with their reviews. 142 plans from individual communities, and then 3 plans that cover groups of communities. The Dakota County Rural Collaborative prepared 1 plan for 16 communities, and that plan also included a local surface water management plan that covered 15 of those 16 communities. Empire Township prepared and submitted their own plan, for example. Carver and Scott County both do the land use planning for townships in their respective counties, and as part of that, they prepared the local water plans for those townships, which included 10 townships in Carver County and then 10 townships in Scott County. We haven't received plans for 4 communities as of today. I won't name any names, but we are working with them to get those plans complete as well.
Angela,
Yes.
I think we're running a little behind, and I want to
Okay.
have time to still get to the next agenda item, so maybe we can pick the pace up a little.
I can do that. Okay. Water supply planning by the numbers. Communities are planning for 50 new wells. For the improvements to investments in water supply distribution systems in 60 communities, and then 35 communities are planning to invest in their water treatment systems. Next slide, please. The trends and themes in water supply planning are laid out here in front of you. There, I know that this is probably of interest because the LUAC committee has been working with MOSOC, which is the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Commission, I believe. Water, yeah, I'm sorry. It is the Metropolitan Area Water
Supply Advisory
Supply
Committee.
Advisory Committee. I was missing advisory. Thank you, Chair Wolf. So local water supply plans document significant planned investment in water supply system infrastructure, both to maintain and to expand or enhance those systems. Projected water demand is an important factor as well. Compared to 2030 plans, actual and projected water use has gone down as people become more efficient with their water use. Outside of the local water supply plan, local comp plans are most likely to address groundwater in their local surface water management plan, and approximately 3/4 of local surface water management plans discuss groundwater, and that shows a growing recognition of the connection between those 2 aspects of the water cycle. Source water protection there's a wide range in how comp plans kind of reflect the designated source water protection areas. And I think that we see this as an opportunity area, and I think an assumption as well that most of this is usually addressed through the Minnesota Department of Health mandated water protection planning part. That's it for me. Turn it over to Mike to talk about parks and climate change, etc.
Sounds good. Next slide, please. So as you probably know, most of the region is served by an existing or planned element of the regional park system. Staff had identified 16 plans that they thought were exceptional because they went above and beyond related to looking at service or gap analysis, where a community wasn't served trend information in park use or detailing public engagement around park planning. Next slide, please. Council staff reviewed plans related to resilience, climate change, and natural resources. They found that 57 included a resilience chapter or a section in the plan, 42 integrated resilience into multiple plan elements and chapters. And the most common approach used by 134 communities addressed natural resource conservation or preservation to a degree beyond required by statute. Other approaches less common included energy plans, climate action plans, climate vulnerability, etc. Next slide, please. In terms of resilience and climate change, Plans primarily address renewable energy, greenhouse gas emission, electric vehicles, and energy efficiency. The most common was renewable energy, and more specifically, solar energy. Community resilience and climate change discussions were often accompanied by efforts to reduce local greenhouse gas emissions, with many communities citing state and greenhouse gas goal reductions as their motivation. A significant number of plans incorporated information to make the community EV ready. And finally, although not discussed as frequently, energy efficiency was another key topic. I want to make a call out to the city of Falcon Heights that set ambitious energy goals aimed at increasing energy efficiency and reducing carbon emissions, including goal of reduce emissions by 80% and securing 50% of the community's electrical energy from renewable sources by 2030. Next slide, please. The most frequent topic regarding natural resources was tree, canopy, and urban forestry. Often having urban forest and tree preservation policies, developing an inventory or forest management plan, looking at areas of low coverage, heat vulnerability, and such. Most natural resource sections tended to address the relationship between development and natural resource conservation. Standout, several communities mentioned developing a natural resource inventory. Standout communities, again, here's a reference to the city of Shakopee for its extensive section on the natural environment, in which it strives to protect and celebrate the community's natural features through initiatives that balance growth and development. City of Ramsey also noted for its recent initiatives and pilot programs to protect wetlands and the neighboring Mississippi River through wetland setback policy, shoreline protection, and such. Angela. I believe this is Angela's section, if I'm not mistaken.
Sorry, I need to unmute myself. I apologize. Okay, this section is on equity, economic competitiveness, aging, and public health. And I want to make sure that we cover at least the equity portion of this. It's one of the outcomes set in Thrive. I just also want to acknowledge that as is economic competitiveness, but we, through this comprehensive plan review process, had also created partnerships with partner agencies to talk about aging and public health and how the comprehensive plans reflected that. So with that, I will say equity by the numbers. We reviewed 136 comprehensive plans for explicit mention of equity terms. Terms like equity, equitable, inequity, inequitable equities, and inequities. And so our search of all of those plans, we were able to kind of broadly group these together into explicit, minimal, or none. Of the 136 plans, 52 explicitly mentioned equity terms, 40 minimally included equity terms, and 44 didn't include equity terms at all. Most of the communities that did not mention equity terms in their plans were designated as suburban, diversified, rural, and agricultural. Most communities that explicitly mentioned equity terms in their plan are designated as urban center, urban, suburban edge, and emerging suburban edge. The community designations with the highest number of communities that explicitly mentioned equity were urban and suburban. In addition, 52 plans that explicitly mentioned equity, 21 of those plans stated as a guiding principle, and plans with an equity guiding principle integrated equity into most of the plan elements rather than just sporadically throughout the plan. Most of those communities are designated as urban center and urban. Several communities also use icons to specifically identify goals and policies all throughout the plan. I know that we have done some highlights on how equity was integrated into their planning process, I think for the city of St. Louis Park, that we presented to the LUAC committee. Next slide, please. The communities that explicitly mentioned equity in their plans often introduced it through a discussion of growing racial and cultural diversity in the community and across the region. Several communities also introduced equity by acknowledging the region's significant disparities and the need to address them. Although many communities addressed equity in several plan elements, it was most frequently mentioned in the transportation, housing, and parks and trails sections. Um, the review also revealed that communities simply state equity. We're actually framing it as either social equity, health equity, or racial equity. And in addition to discussing community-based initiatives to address equity, several communities included information on efforts to advance equity with internal processes. And some examples include the development of committees or work groups to lead local equity initiatives and the evaluation of recruitment, hiring, and retention practices so that staff are representative of the community. With that, Greg, I think if we can skip ahead to slide 53, we will come to the end and just talk a little bit about next steps. As we've mentioned all throughout, our work it continues, and we're planning on additional research in some of these areas. We have several projects in local planning assistance that we're working on right now. One, which is the 2040 Comprehensive Plan debrief, actually is touching base with every community that we've done a plan review for, and kind of asking local planning staff, how did it go? What could have gone better? How can we improve things? And we're also planning to provide additional technical assistance for implementation. And that's our program that we call the Planet program. We're scoping that out and planning to start delivering on some of those resources this spring. The next step for the council is looking towards the 2050 Metropolitan Development Guide because committee member Bottom is correct that 2050 plans are the next round and the regional policy plans will precede the local plans in that regard. So with that, I will ask if there were any additional questions, any additional comments that you'd like us to come back and report on. Happy to move on.
Any
Madam
questions,
Chair.
comments?
Madam Chair.
I can't recognize who that is. Is that Phil?
Dan Rowe.
Dan Rowe, okay. Go
Just
ahead.
a quick thing that came up when we were first considering the comprehensive plan update on our city council is that the city of Roseville changed designation from previous guidance to be in the urban area. And I think there was a lot of tension about that amongst our community and council members. And so I wonder if that definition or that name of that category might be able to be changed to something like urban edge or something like that. That's a little less urban, to put it that way. That was just a comment, a feedback to provide from that designation.
We can always rename things. We can start with a whole bunch of different categories again. They seem to change every time, but yes, that is, and I'm sure staff is writing this down so they can remember it for the next one. Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Anybody? I'm not seeing anyone unmuting. I have a comment. We seem to have a really good talent for having our plans go into effect just as something that's a major disruption to the region happens between the recession on the last one and the pandemic on this one. We have an excellent knack for timing things just as everything changes. But I'm assuming that staff is working hard on figuring out what's going to be a permanent change and what things are going to go back to normal again in the future.
Madam Chair, this is Lisa.
Yes.
You are
Right. That is part of what we're doing. And had we known that we were so good at hitting a cycle, I might have invested a little differently. But at any rate, it is something that tends to fall in some cycles. Economically, I would say, not necessarily pandemics, but yes, absolutely. The investigation of what's going to stick and what isn't, or how much it might stick, is certainly something that is something that we're fully engaged in, not just in community development, but also across all of the different uses, whether it's transportation or visitation to the regional parks and trail system. Some places we would like people to, keep doing that, keep coming back to those parks and trails, right? So different approaches and different ways to make some things stick and maybe make not other things stick, but definitely a great topic of conversation across the entire council.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Madam Chair,
Jerry.
Does water come under this topic?
Anything related to comprehensive plans comes under this topic.
All right. Well, I'm curious. I don't, if any of the staff here can answer. With the increase in population, which means increased building, increased industrial sites, increased this and that. Now, Mother Nature had created the earth, and my understanding, the aquifers that are under us are resupplied by water that's usually in swamps and lakes that siphon down and fill up the aquifers. So has there been any thought about, with all the increased population and everything that goes with it, roads, everything else, which means more water doesn't get siphoned down through the ground, it gets moved somewhere else, and usually it ends up in the rivers which flow out of the state. So is there anybody here that has addressed this issue about the future of our water supply here?
Yes, Jerry, we have a whole division that works on water supply, and they've modeled the aquifers and looked at what the drawdown levels are, and they work with the city utilities and such, trying to figure out how we can make that water last longer, look at other sources such as connecting more cities to river water from Minneapolis and St. Paul, and recharging the aquifers and decreasing water use so we're taking less out of the aquifers in the first place.
Well, has there been any analysis to know how much the aquifers have shrunk?
Yes, there's monitoring wells, and we have that data.
Okay.
And if you want, I can connect you with the people that work in that office, and they can give you more information.
Yes, I would like that. Water is kind of has a special place in my life.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the transportation behavior inventory. Hold on, let me find it. Travel behavior inventory and COVID-19 survey.
Hi, and that's me. I'm Ashley Asmus.
Ashley, welcome.
Thank you. Oh, should I share my slides? I'm sorry. Okay, I wasn't sure if I would be sharing.
Yeah, I don't have your PowerPoint.
No problem. Okay, and I think, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Sandy. They were both put into the Teams folder. Did you not get it, Greg?
You know what? I grabbed two of them out of there. I don't know if she's got it. We're good though.
Yeah, we're all set. Okay, no problem at all. All right. Yeah, thanks. I know we just have a few minutes here before the end of the hour, but I'm really excited to share with you some of the findings from this survey and some of the new findings from our COVID-19 panel. I'm going to start with an overview of this data source called the Travel Behavior Inventory Survey.
This is a regional survey of travel behavior of residents in the entire metropolitan area that's usually, or it used to be conducted every 10 years. It's now conducted every 2 years, starting in 2018. And it's part of a suite of surveys that are conducted in the metropolitan area to better inform the transportation policy plan and also forecast models to understand how travel and transportation needs are going to change into the future. So this is just one of a few surveys. We've got a household travel survey and a transit onboard survey, which will be rolling out this year, actually. It's really exciting that we'll have an onboard survey pretty soon. And there are other special surveys that we conduct as well. For example, one at airports that we might be switching up soon, one of university students, things like that. In this 2018 to 2019 travel behavior inventory survey, it was out in the field, so people were responding to survey questions from October 2018 to October 2019. And in total, we surveyed about 7,870 households. This is an address-based sampling, so it's a random sample of households across the region based on a random draw of addresses, with some oversampling in areas where we expect we might see lower response rates, where people move or maybe have a little less trust of the government, a little lower response overall. And we want to make sure that their behavior and their opinions get reflected in the survey as well. New with this survey this year is that most people responded using a smartphone app. This is really cool data for a data scientist like me to work with because we get a little bit more detailed information about where people are coming and going, and we capture more trips, like trips you just forget about, maybe from one day to the next, but that are really important for understanding travel overall. Some people also preferred to use a one-day diary survey, so they completed this survey online. And then another, I have my notes on the screen behind this presentation, but another few hundred people, I think, completed the survey with a call center. So if you didn't have a smartphone or access to the internet, you could always call. We tried to sample pretty evenly across the region. That said, we had lower response rates than we would like, especially from people of color in the survey, and we're really hoping to correct that going into the next round, which will be rolling out pretty soon here. In total, 16,000 people spread across the whole metro and beyond. You can see a few blue dots here outside the metro region as well. So this is really detailed information and really rich. I've just brought you sort of a sampler platter of what's available, I guess. And if you see any particular topics that you might like to see additional information about, please let me know and I'd be happy to pull that together for you. This is just one sample of sort of fascinating behavioral trends across time of day. So the horizontal axis at the bottom is, the 24-hour time from 0 to 24 all the way on the right. And the vertical bars are the number of trips that are taken at that time for that particular reason. So we divide up travel trips into different buckets, different categories, like maintenance travel might be something like doing an errand for your house or picking somebody up from school. School trips, work trips, and social and recreational trips. You can see that each one has its own unique signature. And I should say, this is all pre-pandemic behavior. We're going to be having the same exact data set and richness of data looking at behavior after the pandemic. And it'll be really fascinating to see how things have changed, especially with this work category here. There's a lot of speculation that these peak hours, this like 9 to 5 office commute might diminish somewhat as more people work from home, and that the midday travel times and the evening travel times where people are still traveling to work for things like shift work, for retail jobs, things like that, that those are going to become even more important. Here's another detailed look about just one kind of trip that is near and dear to my heart, getting to the grocery store. This time on the horizontal axis, I have different modes of transportation: driving, using public transit like a bus, walking, and using a bicycle. And the vertical height of the bar shows you how long, on average, it takes a person to get to the grocery store based on these different modes. You can see that for every mode except for transit trips, it generally takes people about 11 or 12 minutes to get to their grocery store of choice. But when people use transit, those trips tend to be a lot longer, 25 minutes on average, so more than double what you would expect from a driving trip. And this has serious equity considerations. You know, we talk about how we talk a lot about congestion on roadways and things like that, impeding people from moving about the region. But transit competitiveness is an equity issue as well, and we see that in our data. So, of those who took transit to the grocery store in our survey, 18% were African American, compared to just 3% of those who drove and 9% of those who walked. So, the African American residents and people of color in general are overrepresented relative to the population as a whole in these transit trips to the grocery store. Just one small example showing you just one insight into the data. In addition to tracking travel, and this has become even more relevant now, I think, with the pandemic, we track trips that are not taken, days without travel. And we ask people why they didn't travel on that particular day. Most people, when they didn't travel on a particular day, said that it was because they were just doing chores around the house, or there was no particular reason for them not to leave. But this might surprise some people, but that on a typical weekday in the metro, 17% of people don't take a single trip, stayed at home. And this is before the pandemic. You know, some people are doing housework. So there's pretty even gender split here. I looked at the gender split in the data as well. Some people said they were taking care of children, more women than men there, and some people because of weather, with most of those observations happening in January and February towards the end of our survey there. Just 10% of that sample pre-pandemic said that they were working remotely that day, and just 6% said that they lacked transportation, but an important 6%, I should say. Okay. So that was just a glimpse of pre-pandemic travel data. There's a lot more there, hundreds of questions that we asked people, and we tracked people throughout the work week, or throughout the entire week, I should say, a 7-day survey. You know, as the COVID-19 pandemic was playing out across our region, we shifted our focus to rolling out a follow-up survey, a COVID-19 survey that would target the exact same people who took that 2018 to 2019 survey and ask them new questions so we could get a glimpse into what travel was like during the pandemic. So our whole pool of eligible participants for this follow-up survey was any metro area adult who participated in that previous TBI and also provided us an email address and agreed to be recontacted. That was about 8,800 eligible adults. We had about a 37% response rate, which was overall pretty good. This was in our first wave in the spring. I had 3,200 responses overall. Just 9% of the sample was non-white, which was underrepresented as a whole, of course, and we're hoping that future surveys will address this as well. We'll just get better over time. And as with the previous data, you know, we've weighted the individual responses so that they reflect the regional population by race, age, income, household size, a variety of factors, so that if you see any average in this presentation and the ones that were presented before, in fact, these are weighted to reflect the whole population, just like with census data. This is showing you sort of traffic trends in the region over time, starting in March and rolling through the end of November. I just wanted to show you how the survey lined up with you know, decreases in traffic overall in the region. This horizontal line at 0, that's typical traffic levels. So anytime one of these lines approaches zero, we're seeing traffic get closer and closer to what we would expect for that time of year, for that day of the week. The black line is traffic levels on MnDOT statewide sensors. They have about 100 sensors across the state. And the blue line comes from a data set that the Metropolitan Council has been working with a lot this past year, especially, where we're looking at traffic on metro freeways. There's over 1,000 sensors. Gosh, I think the number is actually more like 3,000. We track traffic and model traffic on these sensors now over time. So we've seen traffic levels in the metro hovering right around 20 or 30% below average in the metro area, and getting closer and closer to typical traffic levels statewide. And in fact, these are very close to zero or a little bit above it now. So our first survey rolled out right as the stay-at-home order was lifting at the beginning of May. Then we had another follow-up survey with the same people in late summer, and a third one in fall. We asked about a lot of different topics. I'm not going to touch on all of these today. And in fact, I think I'm just going to dive right into the data so that we can walk through this one particular slide. Okay, I'm going to walk through one kind of complex figure here, and I'll just do it piece by piece. The first thing I'm calling your attention to is the color scheme on the right. So we've got different modes represented by our different council colors here: driving in blue, transit in red, walking or rolling using a wheelchair in blue, and biking in green. And we've got people who are teleworking and those who are unemployed. A very important part of this story, unemployment is. This unemployed, not looking category is here just to show you the labor force that left and re-entered the workforce over time. But mostly this focus is on those who were working. And we're going to look at the question, how has your work commute changed? We're going to start with people who are in households making more than $50,000 a year, so slightly higher income households in the region. The vast majority of people in this income category before the outbreak, 83% drove to work and 6% took transit. There's just about a 2% unemployment rate in this category. And then after the outbreak, this shifted. So from 83%, we now see about 33% of these people driving to work, 54% teleworking, and then 10% unemployed here. I should say these unemployment numbers are a little wiggly and just provide just one estimate of unemployment across the region. Now I want to overlay, one thing we could do with this before and after data is show you where these people ended up. Like, where are all these drivers on the road? Okay, so about a third of them are still driving, about a third of them are teleworking, and then some of them are unemployed. So you read these plots from left to right, like a river running downstream. And just a few are taking transit or biking and walking. And next, we see people who were previously unemployed, are probably still unemployed in this part of the survey, and a handful are now taking transit or driving to work. Those who teleworked before are very likely to still be teleworking now and have kept their jobs. And so this was very indicative of keeping your jobs over time. And those who took transit, the vast majority of people who took transit to work in this income category are now teleworking. And this has been consistent across time, too, I should say. So this is true for the May survey, but as well for the summer and fall. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same thing for workers in households making less than $50,000 a year. So you can see that workers in these households, fewer of them drove, 64%, still a majority, 10% took transit, and there were many more who were unemployed. And then in May 2020, this is what the breakdown of commute travel looked like. So about 36% of these workers drove, 24% were teleworking, and 34% were unemployed. So you can see that unemployment rate, that disproportionate impact on lower income workers and also on workers of color, I should say, is reflected in our survey data as well. So we see that people who were previously unemployed are likely to be unemployed now, currently. And then a few people have joined the workforce and are now teleworking or driving to work. Those who teleworked before, also in this income category, were likely to keep their jobs and continue teleworking. And then there's roughly like a 1/4 split with public transit users, with about a quarter of them becoming unemployed, about a quarter moving to telework, and then a quarter still taking transit, and then some people driving to work. And here's the split for drivers, about a third driving, a third teleworking, and a third unemployed. So this unemployment part of the story really playing out, super important here. Okay. So we also asked about telecommuting. I'm just going to throw the whole slide up here in the interest of time. And this again is a river plot, that you read from left to right, like a river flowing from the left to the right. And this time we're showing you people's telework frequency by how often they worked from home before the outbreak in May 2020, and then what they would prefer. And at least in the very first wave of the survey, we asked people how often they would like to work from home. So first, I'll just call your attention to this black bar on the bottom. You can see that, roughly half of people said that they never teleworked before the pandemic, and I would count myself in this black bar down here. But then in May 2020, we see this huge shift where people who have never teleworked before, and especially those who had just teleworked infrequently, maybe less than once a week, moved to teleworking all the time. And these people were also very likely to say that they wanted to continue teleworking into the future, the vast majority saying that they wanted to telework 2 or more days a week, which was surprising. And this remained really steady over time as well. And this is just showing you that teleworking rates were relatively constant over the course of the pandemic, our 3 survey points, May, July, and October. Let's see. So just touch on one more point here while we still have time. So we also asked about home delivery and online shopping in the survey. This is showing you part of the power of our retrospective survey analysis. We can look at how people's current behavior in the COVID-19 survey compares to their behavior, their actual recorded behavior in the travel behavior inventory of 2019. So we see a growth in people getting non-food items delivered, getting takeout and groceries delivered to home, and those shopping online for items over the course of a week. And interestingly, we saw that there was a huge growth of people getting food delivery, especially among adults with disabilities in our survey. This is a small fraction of our survey, but the trend is really striking. So only 3% of adults with disabilities used to have food delivered 1 or 2 days a week, and now that number is about 19%. This is a huge increase, and we're really curious about whether this is helpful. This trend towards online shopping and delivery services is helpful to people with disabilities, like how this is playing out in people's lived experiences. And we asked about outdoor recreation. So this is showing you a comparison between outdoor recreation rates in summer of 2019 and summer of 2020. You can see that there was a huge growth in people exercising outdoors. I've also broken this down by race, though, and you see a really different story for people who are white in the region relative to people of color, especially African American residents. This growth in outdoor recreation, I think it got a lot of press over the summer and into the fall. I think I remember seeing a lot of popular news articles about biking and things like that. But it's important to remember that that didn't play out evenly across the region, especially for people of color. Okay, so those were just a few topics. I'm right at time here. I'm happy to answer any questions that are important to you. In your slide packet, I've got a list of different topics that are covered in the COVID-19 survey. You can see that there's a real wealth of different topical areas, and I would be happy to pull any data together for policymakers who might find some of this informative for their own work. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments from anybody?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I thought this, all the staff reports today were very good. I found this very interesting because clearly it shows how things have changed because of COVID. And so, and it's probably going to be like this going forward. So I thought it was very enjoyable, and all the staff did a nice job today.
Thank you, Jerry. Any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair,
Yes, John.
can we get the raw data from this? I'll send you an email, but not private stuff, but the methods and all that went into this data analysis.
Yes,
John's
certainly.
a data guy.
Yeah.
That's my day job.
Go ahead. Go ahead and send me an email. Yeah, we have the 2018 to 2019 data already available for download on the Minnesota Geospatial Commons, and we should get this COVID data up as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I would just comment, my family was one of the families that was selected for this. And we did the app, and at the end, I asked my family if I could say that we were willing to be contacted again, and both my husband and my son, who are people of color, said, no way, we're never doing this again, because they really hated the app.
Oh man. Wow, we should get them in our so we really want to conduct focus groups this year to better understand how people are experiencing the survey. We should get your people in our focus group room.
The app was really, really frustrating to use. So if you want to talk about that further, we can offline. I know everybody's waiting to get out of here, but yeah. Anybody else?
One comment, Chair. It's once again, I agree with Jerry. It's a very, very valuable meeting and very helpful. And I was very intrigued as I was looking at the reports before the meeting. And we have a lot of planning to do to try and figure out how to handle these changes. So.
Yes, we do. Thank you. Anybody else? Last chance. Going. Okay, if nobody else has any comments or questions, we are at the end of the agenda. So having no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you for everybody attending. And thank you for staff for putting on some great presentations today.
Yeah.